Yo, what's good, everybody? It's your boy Dread, and you know what time it is. It's time for You Might Be a Nigga Volume 10. It's been a long time coming since I did another one of these, but first off, before I get started, I want to thank everybody for contributing, because this is for y'all too. I shouldn't be the only one to get to have all the fun here. You know, that's why I shout out y'all's facts too. And thanks for watching, everybody who enjoyed the series too. And I haven't done one of these in a while, so let me warm up just to make sure I still got it. Alright, yeah, I got it. I'm ready to go. Alright, first fact is, if you take pictures from MySpace and Facebook in clothes and jewelry that's not yours, you might be a nigga. If the police shoot at you because they think you're armed, you might be a nigga. If there's a thunderstorm and your power was the first one to go out, you might be a nigga. If you see a pair of Nikes hanging from a power line in your neighborhood, you might be a nigga. If you break the neighborhood fire hydrant because you're too lazy to go to the swimming pool, you might be a nigga. If you're in an argument and you think the louder you yell, the better chance you have of winning it, you might be a nigga. Ladies, if you start a story with, see what had happened was, you might be a nigga. Fellas, if you start a story with, hey yo son, check this out, you might be a nigga. If you out of everything in your kitchen except for ketchup and sugar, it ain't no question about it, you are a nigga. Well, those are my original facts, guys. Now it's time for the fan contributed ones. This one comes from my boy Mulatto Brother GW, and he says, you might be a nigga if you have a wife with a few girlfriends on the side. Now the next one comes from my girl Brianna, aka Yaya. Shout out to her. She says, if you yelled and ran the other way would do it running them boys in the hood, Ricky! You might be a nigga. If you know every word to Scarface, The Color Purple, ATL Friday, and Minister Society, you might be a nigga. If you celebrate every major holiday with a cookout, you might be a nigga. Now my boy Singular Rarity, aka Black Knight, says, if you believe that black people started Kool-Aid blends before Kool-Aid Company invented them, you might be a nigga. If you have more ramen noodles in your refrigerator than any type of food, you might be a nigga. If you have kids that are over 5 years old and they don't know what the hell a book is, get confused by the sight of one, you might be a nigga. If you've owned over 6 pairs of Nike Air Force Ones, guilty, you might be a nigga. If you only dated black women, but secretly desire white women, and also have a stash of Asian porn, you might be a nigga. Now, my girl Brittany Sellers, shout out to her, she came up with a lot of them. She says, if your baby drops his pacifier on the floor and you sanitize it by sucking on it, ew, you might be a nigga. If the battery is your remote control are held together with a piece of tape, you might be a nigga. If you add water to your shampoo to stretch it, you might be a nigga. If you ever been beaten by your mama with an extension cord, you might be a nigga. If you use abortion as a form of birth control, ew, you might be a nigga. She also says, if your mama whipped you and your friends when you were little, you might be a nigga. Here's the kicker. If you skip your rent just to buy the new Jordans, you might be a nigga. If you can never keep a cell phone or house phone longer than a month, you might be a nigga. If you use a toothbrush to style your baby hair, you might be a nigga. If the only dates marked on your calendar are the 1st and the 15th of the month, you might be a nigga. If you put sugar on your Frosted Flakes, you might be a nigga. If you have more than 10 uses for Vaseline, you might be a nigga. If there's reusable bacon grease in your coffee can in your stove, you might be a nigga. Now here's one from my boy Ricky Rick, shout out to him. If you ask to borrow $20 from your homeboy for diapers and really buy weed and get stabbed to death, ouch, you might be a nigga. Here's a few from my boy Scott Anthony Morris. If you use yellow trash bags to cover the broken or shot out windows in your new whip, you might be a nigga. If you go to the grocery store in rollers and grease-stained faded sweatpants, you might be a nigga. If you have 2-for-1 food stamp sales for cash, you might be a nigga. If half of your utilities that you buy are in your 3-year-old's name, you might be a nigga. If your toddler can do the percolator and knows every word to a Gucci Mane song, you might be a nigga. If you're waiting for your income tax check to get a new club outfit, you might be a nigga. If you got a rope to hold down the trunk of your car, you might be a nigga. If you got that big ass wooden spoon in your fork, if you got a big ass wooden spoon and fork on your kitchen wall, you might be a nigga. If you 6, your mama 15, and your grandmama 30, you might be a nigga. Now here's a few from my boy Lil D the rapper. You might be a nigga if you wash paper plates. You might be a nigga if you got coupons to the McDonald's dollar menu. You might be a nigga if your idea of a fortune cookie is a food stamp is Oreo with a food stamp in the middle of it. Now here's one from my boy Riley Richards. He says, if you're a lady and you got 6 kids by 6 different baby daddies, you might be a nigga. You also might be a nigga if your daddy's idea of birth control is killing your girl, killing your daughter's boyfriend. Yeah, that's it. And alright, y'all, that'll do it for this edition of You Might Be a Nigga. Thank y'all for contributing and making this so funny. Alright, I'll see y'all in the next one.